I have noticed that gaming has a reboot problem. Video game franchises that entertained us from our childhood, that are still going on to this day, have lost the very thing that made us play them in the first place. There are many reasons as to why this happens, but as most of our favorite franchises are hitting anywhere from over a decade to 20 to maybe even 30 years of age, there are a lot of blaring issues that I really want to draw attention to, because a lot of things have changed. This is one of the biggest reasons why gaming is in the state it's in. I'll be talking about the biggest franchises that I've played games in. I'm not speaking for every franchise, but if you can relate to the franchise that you have played, then that would be good too. When I talk about biggest franchises, I'm talking about franchises like Need for Speed, Call of Duty, Assassin's Creed, God of War and Test Drive Unlimited, and many more other franchises. If I can find good information about a franchise that I've not really played, I will address it using fan feedback. The truth is, just because the franchise is still making money does not really mean that the franchise is doing well. There are many cash grab rebooted games out there, and more often than not, the games are dead anywhere from 3 to 8 months after releasing. But this is something I will get into later. I would like to talk about the franchise I spoke about. I will start with Need for Speed. Need for Speed is a franchise that I've spoken about extensively, and it's a known fact about what exactly happened to the franchise. Need for Speed started off from humble beginnings with being a very simple bare bones arcade racer, as did many, if not all, racing games at the time. Need for Speed had a very exotic and sports car oriented direction, with them being credited in the V-Rally franchise for some reason, together with Eden Games, who were the creators of Test Drive Unlimited. But anyway, Need for Speed made lots of games, but the games only started to see some consistency when Black Box was introduced. Black Box, formerly known as EA Black Box, is really what made Need for Speed what it is today. Things became really good for Need for Speed when they were under the love and care of Black Box. The best era of Need for Speed was the Black Box era. Speak to any Need for Speed fan and they will tell you that was when Need for Speed was making their best games. There would also be a lot of people who would say that the Black Box era was overhyped. I would say each to his own with that, because there's no person who can say that the games were horrible. Maybe not to your fancy, but definitely not all out bad. The Black Box era put Need for Speed on the map. They struck gold with the Need for Speed Underground, then they caught lightning in a bottle with Need for Speed Underground 2. With Need for Speed Underground 2 arguably being one of the best games in the whole franchise, with debates still to this day about which Need for Speed is the best. The silly argument about this is, people are comparing great games. There really is no loser when comparing them. Under Black Box's watch, great Need for Speed games are still being made. Making a good game is easy. Making a great game is next to impossible. I said Black Box brought consistency. What I mean by that is, Black Box consistently brought great games, because the Need for Speed Underground games were followed up by the next great game, and that is Need for Speed Most Wanted 2005, which could also arguably be the biggest game in the franchise. People could say the same thing about it being overhyped, but many people still sing the game's praises for what it managed to achieve. Then they followed up with Need for Speed Carbon, which was still a great game on its own, but after Carbon, the game shifted direction to make more circuit racing games, which they followed up by Need for Speed Pro Street, that has a very dedicated fan base. They strayed away from the free roam format, and it was to their detriment, because after Pro Street they made Need for Speed Undercover, which has to be the least favored Black Box Need for Speed game, and rightfully so. A lot of people don't have many good things to say about that game. They made a new game called Need for Speed World, which is basically an online version of the old Black Box style Need for Speed games, almost like Most Wanted 2005, but online. Need for Speed World has a dedicated fan base. Even when the servers were shut down, there were fan-made servers that put the game back online. The final days of Black Box would start with Need for Speed Undercover, Even after Undercover, there were some new games made by different studios under EA, like Criterion and Slightly Mad Studios. There was even a one-off game called Need for Speed Nitro, but that game was a Nintendo exclusive because it would utilize the Nintendo Wii's unique controls. Then thereafter is when Criterion and Slightly Mad Studios would take over Need for Speed for a few years. The franchise still maintained its popularity, but it just shifted directions by moving over to try doing simulation racing games. But I will cut to the chase. Black Box's last game was Need for Speed The Run, which was still a good game, but it wasn't good enough. There were talks of a sequel, but Black Box got shut down. After Need for Speed The Run, they tried to make another Most Wanted game. The truth about Need for Speed Most Wanted 2012 is that it was supposed to be Need for Speed Most Wanted 2. People say that Black Box started working on the game a while ago. There's a lot of beta footage of the game of where it looks completely different from what it looks like now. There are a lot of people still trying to find more information about Need for Speed Most Wanted 2. Need for Speed 2012 was a reboot. Still a great game, but the game really ruined its reputation by being called Most Wanted. Had it been called anything else, it wouldn't have been as bad. But after Most Wanted 2012, the franchise took a nosedive, getting worse and worse with each launch. Criterion did their best to save the franchise, but the games just didn't hit the same, swapping out what made the franchise iconic for what is popular and trending. Since the franchise has no real identity now, Need for Speed itself is dead because Criterion is no longer working on Need for Speed games. So the franchise is dead in the water because they were not making games that were good enough. Had Need for Speed still been making as great games as it was back then, it would have been seen as a priority, but EA chose different. So now we don't have Need for Speed anymore, and we have no idea when it's coming back. Call of Duty has to be one of the biggest franchises of all time. For a long time, they had been the end-all and end-all of first-person shooters. Call of Duty started off small by making old war-style games that were really good. They really gave you a very good feeling of the time period, giving you a glimpse of what war was like back then. I personally played a few of the first games, but Call of Duty 2 was really good. I think I finished that game like twice, but Call of Duty started to pick up steam with Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, hands down one of the best games of all time. I played this game so much. This was when Call of Duty blew up because they also focused on the multiplayer. They created one of the best multiplayers of all time that still to this day goes unrivaled. Fast forward, they made Modern Warfare 2 and Modern Warfare 3, which were both sequels of Modern Warfare 1. They carried on a consistent story that follows the life of a special ops team that is filled with many great characters that you grow attached and feel an emotional connection to. Call of Duty, like most of the big franchises, had a good run of very successful games, making extremely great games that felt handcrafted from a passionate person, a person who cared more about making a good experience than all the amount of money they could make or how they could squeeze every dime from their fan base. For a first-person shooter, the game really felt like art. It had a very good artistic direction. Call of Duty was on a hot streak with the Modern Warfare games. Then they started with their new line of games called Black Ops, which felt way more story-oriented than Modern Warfare. It gave you more of a cinematic storytelling experience. The best part is that the gameplay was still really good. The best part about Call of Duty is its very good gameplay, which was a part of their biggest success and formula. They had perfected their gameplay and it carried over to each game, and this is what kept us coming back for more. As Call of Duty Modern Warfare ended with Modern Warfare 3, Call of Duty began to make Black Ops their new main game. Black Ops 2 has to be the best Call of Duty I have ever played. I have hundreds of hours on that game. I might even have thousands of hours on it. The game was the perfect mix between great single player and perfect multiplayer, except for when there were modders and cheaters, but to be fair, that was in almost every game at that point. They still made the once-off games that weren't too bad, but people appreciated them for at least trying to make something different. Call of Duty Ghosts and Advanced Warfare were alright, but they also received a lot of hate for not being that good. But with every game that received a lot of hate, there is always a community of people who like them and say that they weren't that bad. Call of Duty was still doing decent by the time Black Ops 3 came out. It was a very well received game that added a whole lot of new things. By Black Ops 3, the game went in a very tech and futuristic oriented direction, with Black Ops 3 being the most techy at the time. People still loved it because it still had the formula that made all Call of Duty games great. When Advanced Warfare came out, it wasn't too bad, but from what I have seen, it seems that a lot of people hated it, and this is where things would kind of go south for Call of Duty, because after Infinite Warfare, they made Call of Duty World War II, which was a well received game, but it looks like more of a story driven single player game than a big multiplayer game like the rest, because after that it would be Black Ops 4, which from what I've heard, people didn't like that much either. This would also be where Call of Duty added their first Battle Royale mode. The game was hated so much that it even got delisted, which is wild because you can pretty much buy almost every Call of Duty. The reboot of Call of Duty would start with Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2019, which wasn't that bad of a game. I've heard many good things about it, but it has a lot of flaws though. Many people have voiced their displeasure, especially with what the game is like today. The reboots didn't stop there though, because they pretty much rebooted the whole Modern Warfare franchise again, but only this time with a very live service direction. This wouldn't help because they made Call of Duty Warzone, which I would say is what ruined the direction of the Call of Duty franchise, because even after that, it seems like they focus less on making great games like they used to. A lot of the games they made after Warzone were very forgettable, and fast forward to now, things are looking even worse for Call of Duty because the games don't last anymore. The worst part about modern Call of Duty games has to be the horrible gameplay. Besides the live service aspect, the games just don't play as well as they used to. I tried to get used to it, but I just can't. I miss how smooth everything used to be. It seems like every Call of Duty plays like Warzone now, which is what I feel killed the franchise. The old Call of Duty games were perfect. Assassin's Creed has to be one of my favorite franchises of all time. This is why it hurts me to make a video about the games not being as good anymore. Assassin's Creed is a franchise that came out of nowhere and changed the way video games would be played forever. The amount of innovation that the game started with was amazing. It all starts with Prince of Persia. Assassin's Creed started out as a Prince of Persia game, more so in this case some sort of a spin-off, but later down the line the decision was made for it to become its own game. This would be a very smart choice because Assassin's Creed would become one of Ubisoft's biggest franchises, that today is the franchise that Ubisoft is praying will save the company. Assassin's Creed started out strong with the first game already being one of the best games ever. They then followed up with Assassin's Creed 2, which was everything good that Assassin's Creed 1 could be. They improved on pretty much everything. Many people would agree that Assassin's Creed 2 is where the franchise blew up in popularity. Ezio is one of the greatest video game protagonists. His story literally started when he was a baby, which is rare for any game to do, but they managed to do it and it was really good. Assassin's Creed 2 is when the games would become consistent, with following the life of Ezio Auditore de Firenze, who was an assassin and high-ranking member of the Brotherhood. Ezio would become the face and mascot of Assassin's Creed, a token of how good the franchise was. Ezio had a whole trilogy. Assassin's Creed Brotherhood was more of a spin-off DLC. The game didn't really go as far out as Assassin's Creed 2. The goodness with Brotherhood is that it felt like an improvement or an upgrade, and Ezio carried the whole franchise. Assassin's Creed games were very story oriented. They really used Ezio's story to make the games great, with his last game being Revelations. After putting Ezio's story to rest, the franchise needed a new face, and that would be the modern day protagonist called Desmond Miles, who had a very slow start to his story but would become more fleshed out over time. Assassin's Creed 3 is the 5th game in the franchise, and by that point Assassin's Creed was still going strong. Assassin's Creed 3 set out to make the modern day more prominent, and this would work in their favor, because until Assassin's Creed Revelations, the modern day didn't have any fully playable levels outside of a small office or safe house. They tried it in Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, but it was not on the same scale as Assassin's Creed 3. By the end of Brotherhood, Desmond went into a coma and only woke up at the end of Revelations. The unfortunate part is that Assassin's Creed 3 would be Desmond's last game. He was the main protagonist of the modern day story and helped steer the franchise, and with his death at the end of Assassin's Creed 3, the franchise later struggled to make sense of itself. That would lead to them often guessing what to do next, instead of having one vision. Things would later go on in an ambiguous direction. Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag is the 6th game in the franchise. By this point, the franchise has changed. The old vision was gone, but the game still maintained the same formula. Assassin's Creed is a success due to its formula, one that Black Flag still had. This was even after the creator, Patrice Désilets, got let go, but Black Flag was still a major success. The game did very little to give the franchise longevity, because after this is when they would start to lose their edge. To fast forward a little bit, Assassin's Creed stuck to its formula for a while after Black Flag. Though the games were not bad, they got a lot of hate. The worst one of all was Assassin's Creed Unity. This wasn't a bad game, but it just had a bad launch. One could easily say that it was one of the worst launches ever. Over time, the game has been fixed, and a lot of people have warmed up to the game, coming back to calling it a great game, especially considering the direction that the franchise has gone in. Assassin's Creed started making RPG games, and one could say what they did was very controversial, but a lot of people were open to the idea, and I would like to mention that I am not one of them. I like the old games and I miss their old formula, because even though they went RPG, the RPG games didn't get any better as time went on. Many people are saying that Assassin's Creed Origins was the last good Assassin's Creed game because it still had a good formula. This is unfortunate because the RPG direction didn't sustain people for long. Now we are in the situation we are in, to where the franchise has been rebooted, and there are even talks of rebooting it again. We are about 4 games into the Assassin's Creed RPGs, and I know Mirage is labeled as a return to roots, but at this point we can't really call it anything. And after 4 games in and 1 right around the corner, there's no way we can know what's going to happen to Assassin's Creed. So far, Assassin's Creed Shadows is one of the most controversial Assassin's Creed games. With the game not even being out yet, it's already taking the place of Unity in terms of being controversial. The RPG games have split up the fan base and have ruined the reputation of Assassin's Creed. God of War is a franchise I used to like a lot. It used to fall in the category of never play when your parents are around or when you are alone at home. As someone who grew up during the PS2 era, I had the chance to play God of War when it was peak. Even when God of War came out onto PS3, it was as good as it had ever been. God of War 3 is one of my favorite games of all time. Just everything that game managed to achieve, especially for the PS3. The game really gave more than was expected. The difference between PS2 and PS3 is that with PS3, everything could be detailed, and I swear, they put in the work for every penny. The goodness with God of War is that the reboots didn't start until PS4. Even though they remastered God of War 3, they still rebooted the franchise, going in a more storyteller cinematic direction, with even changing main characters' design and voice actors. The latest God of War games are a lot softer, they're a lot more expressive. They're not bad games, they're just not good God of War games. The reboot has taken away a lot of what people liked about God of War games. The truth is, Kratos is not supposed to be this kind of person. If you wanted Kratos to have a happy ending, then you should have ended the franchise. I fell out of love with God of War because I don't have a PS4 or 5, but also because I miss the old Kratos. I'm not a fan of the new soft Kratos. They've changed everything about God of War now to the point of where the franchise doesn't interest me. They make okay games that are safe and Disney-like. The design of the latest games are not bad, but I just can't sit through it. The last God of War I played was Ascension, and I feel that it was a decent send-off to the franchise, and it left me not wanting more. I felt content with the ending, and that's when I parted ways with God of War. Test Drive Unlimited is one of the most misunderstood franchises ever. I feel that the reason the franchise fell off was because at the time there was a lot to choose from. The old TD1 and 2 are very beloved for what they achieved. It's really sad because I honestly feel that the Test Drive Unlimited games could have been enjoyed on every generation of consoles, but unfortunately, the Test Drive Unlimited games saw their end on PS3 and Xbox 360. They were even delisted on PC, so you can't get them anymore. The thing with TD1 and 2 is that there has never been a car game that has ever given us as much as TDU did. They gave a high life simulator in the form of a car game. You'd think that driving cars is the main aim of the game, but TDU 1 and 2's biggest strong suits is their social aspects. Besides just driving, there was so much you could do, and the best part is that you could enjoy it with friends. There was a whole different way to play the game if you're playing them online. The game would be more fun with friends. Just the level of love and passion that was used to make this game is something you can feel when you play them. TDU 1 and 2 were special because they gave the player way more than they needed and wanted. TDU 1 and 2 also has really great DLC. How many car games do you know that have a massive scale 1-to-1 map, a bunch of really good characters, a big selection of cars, and even a few motorbikes, while also having customizable houses, a dynamic weather system, and also police? The Test Drive Unlimited games were not just big, they had depth as well. The reboot of Test Drive Unlimited would be Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown. The franchise would finally come back after more than a decade of being MIA. The only problem is, Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown was a flop. The game did not meet anyone's expectations. It was a bare bones live service disgrace of a game that had absolutely nothing to do with the old TDU games. The worst part is that I thought that they would bring back everything that TDU 1 and 2 did. They tried to bring back Albiza, but from what I have seen, it did very little to save the game. At this point, the game is so bad that it is next to unplayable. Pretty much the whole player base has left. The game had so much potential, but it's not a true sequel to TDU 1 and 2. What we needed was Test Drive Unlimited 3. Because Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown looks like an indie game when compared to TDU 1 and 2. They could have even hit a copy and paste from the old games, and that would have been even better than what we got. There is nothing nostalgic about Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown. There is nothing that was brought over from the old games, and this is just a case of a bad video game that tried to use name recognition. The demo of this game was bad, and so was the final product. The final product should never look or play anything like the demo or beta. Video games are in a weird place right now. New games are struggling to come out, and the reboots give us false hope. Some reboots are good, but some are bad, especially when it's a reboot you never asked for. It's one thing to make a bad sequel, which is way more forgivable, but to make a bad reboot and then remove the original is unforgivable. What we have now is a situation where gaming is struggling to make good games. Instead of making bad reboots, I wish we could just get new good games. I hate these cash grab reboots that are worse than the originals. This is a really sad time for gaming. And with that, this is the Chilly Man signing off. Thank everyone for watching. Peace out.